going to get started then, just with introductions. I want to let everyone know that this is being recorded and it will be posted on our social media sites afterwards. My name is Allison Brazelton and I'm a therapist at TurningPoint. I want to thank you and welcome you guys for joining us today. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box and we're going to get to those. I think there's an activity Naynette said, so we're going to get to those then, and then we'll get to some at the end as well. But as you think about questions, just type them in there and we will get to them at some point during the presentation. Before I turn it over to our speakers, I want to remind everyone that TurningPoint is a 501c3 nonprofit that depends on community support. And these are our socially responsible partners that make these events possible without charge. And we are so grateful to all of them. And now I'm going to turn it over to our presenters, Naynette and Hannah Ashmore. And I'm going to mute myself. Naynette is our TurningPoint counselor, and Hannah is our student intern.
Okay, well, good morning. I'm just talking and I'm on mute. Well, not morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to once again, one of our educational events regarding social or psychological emotional support for our patients. I'm having computer issues, so please bear with me. So today we are doing a presentation on feeling hopeless does not mean you are hopeless. So just because you're experiencing some anxiety, some sadness, some grief, some frustration, overwhelmed, does not mean there are not coping mechanisms and skills and techniques and things that you can do to implement to cope and manage those feelings. So today, as Allison said, I'm Naynette Kennett. I am a licensed clinical social worker and I'm the counselor here at TurningPoint. And I provide individual and facilitate the support group and any other emotional supportive needs to support the patients at TurningPoint. And this is Hannah. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Hannah Ashmore. I am the student intern here at TurningPoint. I'm currently getting my Master's of Social Work at Georgia State. And so I've been here for all semester, and then I'll get next semester as well at TurningPoint.
All right, so some of you may or may not have met myself as well as Hannah. If you've met with us individually, welcome. If not, please, there are services available at TurningPoint for individual as well as, again, support groups. Individual, you would just contact the front office to schedule a meeting with myself, and they're with me on Wednesdays, or our support group is on the fourth Wednesday for MBC patients at 10 a.m. and stage 0 or through 3. They are on Wednesdays, the fourth Wednesday at 6 p.m. However, this month there is an exception because that Wednesday is right before Christmas. So we will be having it next Wednesday at 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. So please look out for email announcement, or you can contact the front desk. So let's get started. So as I stated, we decided to do this presentation because we meet with patients and we see a lot of patients expressing feelings of being overwhelmed, being anxious, tired, physically tired, emotionally tired, psychologically tired, frustrated. And so we thought about ending the semester. I'm sorry, it's in the semester for Hannah, so I'm thinking semester. But ending the year with actually providing some tangible techniques and activities and exercises that you can potentially implement in your day-to-day to help you to cope with whatever feelings or whatever thoughts that you may be experiencing as a result of your breast cancer diagnosis. So every other month we try and provide an educational event, but this one we are going to briefly talk about grief, anxiety, depression, loss, and then provide some coping strategies to actually practice right now. And then if you look at this PowerPoint or look at this webinar later, you will have access to those techniques. So I skipped the slide. If we can just do a mood check. Very interactive today. So kind of get a feeling, if you can type in the chat, how are you feeling today? So are you scales from 1 to 10, 1, very good, kind of piece of a cake, lovely day. 5, not too good. 10, out of control, ballistic. 8, really tough. If you can just type the number in the chat to share how you're feeling today.
All right, and I will be looking for those answers for us. Oh, here we go.
Thank you.
Yes, we have a 7 so far. Let's see, anxious 7. She had a PET scan this week.
Oh, okay.
A 3.
Ooh.
So we got 2 7s and a 3.
Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing. So hopefully, by the end of this presentation, we'll be able to decrease some of those feelings and move towards getting closer to 1. So those who are at the 7, hopefully after practicing a couple of these techniques, we can bring you down a couple of numbers. And for you, that's the 3, we can get you to 1. Ideal. But it's not, we don't know that's possible. Maybe we can see. Okay. All right. So when we think about breast cancer, we want to talk about the psychological distresses as it relates to breast cancer. And so it is one of the most prevalent cancers in the world, affecting at least 2.1 million worldwide. It's the most prevalent among women, especially here in the United States. However, the mortality rate is rather low compared to other cancers. And so there's an increased survival rate when you diagnose at an early stage. And so it's 90% survival rate actually after 5 years. So although it's the most prevalent, and it's most prevalent among women and most common for the women here in the United States, there's a 99% survival rate after 5 years. The quality of life is definitely impacted as a result of hearing that diagnosis and then ultimately going through treatment. And the quality of life, the changes can be negative or positive. It just depends on the person. The majority of the literature does discuss and talk about how removal of a breast influences the quality of life as well as the psychosocial well-being of women. And so research shows, it assumes that the more trauma that you may experience, that your body experiences as a result of the diagnosis, the more severe the psychological distresses will be. And it's relating to body image. So if you've had a lumpectomy versus one who's had a double mastectomy, the one who has the double mastectomy will most likely have more severe psychological distress. There's distress with sexuality, sexual function, sexual activity, anxiety, depression, and again, quality of life, but also sense of loss and then grief and loss. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about grief and loss and what that looks like as it relates to breast cancer patients.
So anxiety, most people experience anxiety in their lifetime, and a breast cancer diagnosis can be a trigger for anxiety. We'll start with what anxiety is. It is a future-oriented what-if way of thinking. And these anxious thoughts can be triggered by stressful events, like we said, like cancer, but it is not caused by past events. And the underlying psychological state that motivates these anxious feelings is fear. And we want to normalize those anxious feelings because especially during and after a cancer diagnosis, anxiety is very, very common. So in a study on the prevalence of depression and anxiety among different cancer patients, they found that actually breast and stomach cancer had the highest prevalence of anxiety and depression among all of the cancer patients. And so, as we all know, cancer is perceived as a serious and chronic disease. And you can feel hopeless. Your diagnosis can remind you of painful deaths that you have experienced in your life. And it can just create panic, confusion, uncertainty, anxiety, all of these different things. And so it essentially causes a dramatic breakdown in this psychic balance of a breast cancer patient. And a lot of times it's fearing the worst outcome that could happen in a situation that is bringing you anxiety. You know, you have this, you're in this situation, this circumstance, and your mind naturally jumps to the worst outcome. And you're like, that's the only one. That's what's going to happen to me. That's what this is going to turn into. And those anxious feelings are motivated by the fear that we talked about. And the levels of anxiety can differ from person to person. Frequency and severity of anxiety. So I think it's really important to not compare the anxious feelings you're feeling to that of your friends or someone else who has a breast cancer diagnosis, or anyone else really. It varies a lot. So what are some of the anxious thoughts that you might have during and after your diagnosis? These ones that are listed up on the screen here are ones that Dr. Kennett and I have heard a lot and that are very common. Will my cancer come back, and when? A lot of times we see this, and you ring the bell and you're done with the treatment, and your body has been through trauma physically and emotionally. And you're like, well, I've just gone through all this. Of course it's going to come back. Those fears, your mind naturally just goes to the future. Well, it's great now. I'm done now, but it's going to come back. And we'll look at the third one. Will I have a mental breakdown at some point? We see this one a lot because I have seen, and I know Dr. Kennett has as well, how strong Turning Point breast cancer patients are mentally and physically. And you want to use your strength to just suppress those emotions. Like, I'm strong. I don't need to cry. I can do this. And you suppress and you suppress and you suppress. But the reality is that these emotions are not going to go away, no matter how hard you try. And so suppressing them really, they'll just come out in a mental breakdown somewhere along the road. And so we want to help you guys understand the importance of sitting with those emotions and really working through them so that doesn't happen. And then I want to talk about the last one. Everyone I know that has had breast cancer died. Well, I died too. This one is also very common from what we see. And again, very, very normal to think that breast cancer equals death, because a lot of you know a lot of people that have had breast cancer who have died. So naturally you think that, oh, I will die too. And that's not necessarily the case. So all of these anxious thoughts, and you might have some that you could add to this list, or many of you might relate to a lot of these, but these are all some common ones that we see. And we will give you some coping mechanisms that can help reduce these anxious thoughts.
And also remember how we stated earlier that the mortality rate or survival rate is high for breast cancer survivors. So that's another, as Hannah was saying, just because you have the diagnosis does not equate to death as it relates to the diagnosis.
Yes. So, like we said, these anxious thoughts are very normal, and you've got to be kind to yourself as you experience these anxious thoughts. You're not crazy for experiencing anxiety. You are simply a human being. We all have it. And like I said, it looks different and feels different for each person. And I think it's also really important to understand that you are not your anxiety. Feelings of anxiety are passing through, and they may be present in your life now or more present in your life later on at different times in your life. But you are not defined by your anxiety. And again, we are going to help you with ways to cope with this anxiety throughout this presentation. And yeah. So anxiety, if properly handled, it can be reduced. And like I said, it doesn't mean it's just poof, gone forever, never going to come back. But hopefully these tools that we practice today and that we'll give you a worksheet that you can practice on your own time, that those can help you cope with the anxiety that you get down the road in your life. And the stresses that can cause anxiety are due to lots of different things. Lack of information, maybe from your healthcare providers. You feel like you don't really know what's going on. You're not used to this kind of medical terminology. Reduced self-efficacy, inability to the adaptation of their new status. You obviously have lots of different new normals that you're having to adjust to. Changes in the body, which can lead to body image stressors. And of course, fear of death. These are all stressors that can trigger anxiety. And if they're not properly managed, they can lead to relapses of cancer, prolonged treatment, severe depression, anxiety, and reduced quality of life, as Dr. Kennett has mentioned. And so coping strategies can be one of the most effective ways to help you cope with these stressors and anxieties. And one of those effective coping mechanisms is mindfulness, which we will get into. And lastly, mindfulness interventions. Past studies have shown that they reduce distress by improving emotional regulation or through learning how one can alter, experience, and express their emotions.
And so now we're going to just briefly talk about grief. And I'm doing a real brief overview of grief because in the upcoming 2022, oh my gosh, 2022, we will do a presentation on truly understanding grief and loss and what that looks like. So this is just really a brief overview of that some of you may be experiencing some grief or not sure what you're experiencing, as Hannah's going to speak to. Mindfulness is being able to name your emotions. And so maybe you're not even sure that you're experiencing some grief or mourning or some grief and loss. So what is it? It's feeling or reaction manifested due to the bereavement or mourning after a significant loss. And research has shown in the past, grief was typically associated with death. But over the years, grief theorists and experts have recognized and realized it's more than just death. It's just loss, and a significant loss. And as it relates to breast cancer patients, it's the loss, it talks about multiple losses. It's unwanted and unpleasant feelings that cannot be escaped. So imagine having feelings that you just can't, you just always feel them, but then on top of it, not actually being able to name what it is, understand why. It's symbolic losses, which is the loss of health through illness. So again, as research has shown, that grief is more than just mourning at the death of the loss of the death of a loved one, but it's actually loss through maybe being diagnosed again through a chronic illness. And when we think of loss, there's multiple types of losses, especially with breast cancer survivors or patients. It's loss of potentially loss of hair, loss of figure, loss of breast, loss of fertility, loss of sexuality due to the treatment. There's loss of identity, physical completeness. There's a sense of femininity, no longer feeling feminine because you maybe do not have hair, or your figure has changed, or you've got a mastectomy, unable to enjoy sex, status in society as a woman. Well, all of these things is what society has determined is a woman. And so if you are experiencing a loss of these things, there can be some unwanted and unpleasant feelings that you are dealing with on a day-to-day as a result of hearing this diagnosis and going through treatment. And so it contributes to having a loss of self-value. And then just about your future, loss of your future, what that look like. Some may or may not have children, and as a result cannot have children. Again, a mastectomy, losing the removal of your breast. So there's a lot of losses that you may experience, and as a result, there are unwanted and unpleasant feelings that you just cannot escape. Grief is also mourning without death. So can you imagine just living day to day, just having these unwanted, unpleasant feelings, not wanting to live or not wanting to do things, feeling sad all the time, just mourning, and can't escape it. But I do want you to understand, not everyone struggles with grief. So there's some people who experience grief and still able to go to work, still able to socialize, engage, and still have a positive or a healthy quality of life. So everyone does not struggle. And oftentimes grief symptoms are misdiagnosed as depression. And that's why we included depression, because that's why we included the depression piece, to talk about how it mirrors and it looks alike, but due to research and the update of the new DSM-5, when it comes to diagnosing and mental illness, there has been some changes and revisions. Can you all see these things at the top? Or is this just me? Okay, I'm sorry. And then research indicates serial losses increases the likelihood of feelings of depression and anxiety. And again, anxiety, grief and loss, depression, poor body image are top 4 things that research show breast cancer patients experience. And women who've had mastectomies have also increased levels of depression and anxiety. They often go through the mourning process, which there's a model for grief and loss, and there's 5 stages, and denial and depression are a couple of them, but sadness as it relates to the loss of the breast. And 6 months post-diagnosis, even 5, I've read research that goes as far as 5, 10, and 15 years post-diagnosis, there are still clinical levels, significant clinical levels of distress and depression and anxiety as it relates to breast cancer survivors. And a lot of the research show is kind of suffering in silence. And I'll talk about it later. There's a disenfranchised grief that we're going to talk about, which it's not acceptable in society. So people do not look at it or view it as a problem. And they talked about how when women begin to grow their hair back, go back to looking normal, people think that they're okay, even though they may be experiencing some grief and mourning and sadness and depression. Because they look okay, they are experiencing a disenfranchised form of grief. And so again, in 2022, we'll talk more about that. And so I'm going to distinguish what is depression. So I've explained what grief is, and now, so depression is a generally pessimistic, with little of no sense of hope for themselves or for the future. And there may be somatic complaints that are present. So can you imagine how this can look like grief? Because if you are having pain as it relates to the surgery, or inability to move, lower range of motions, any type of physical problems and somatic complaints, if you go in and complain of that, people think you may be depressed. Or if you continue to express complaints about that after you're out of treatment and it's assumed that you should be better, then it'll be assumed that you must be depressed, but yet it could still be grief. The language of how you describe it may reflect others' expression of depression, such as feelings of worthlessness, loss of energy, marked by also loss of ability to experience pleasure. And so again, you could be tired because of chemo. You can no longer enjoy sex or social activities. And again, it's going to be misdiagnosed as being depressed when it's related to grief and loss as it relates to the diagnosis. And then physical changes refer to vegetative features are critical to determine if it's a mood disorder. So again, not being able to express how you feel, not being able to share emotions, not being able to talk about how physical changes you may have are all examples of mood disorder, major depression. And then in the DSM-5, it talks about depressive reactions to grief. And so it's normal grief-related reactions, and it could last for several years, which is why in the past, until the recent updates, the DSM-5 would say if someone is experiencing a loss or bereavement or grief for more than 6 months, it can no longer be grief. It is now considered major depression. And so with research, it has changed. And so now the DSM looks at it as, and starting to consider calling it persistent complex bereavement disorder. And that's, again, to take in consideration that not everyone is experiencing depression, major depression, but experiencing complex bereavement. And think about if you're dealing with something related to your cancer diagnosis daily for 4 or 5 years, it could be considered depression, but it's also your reactions, because if that didn't exist, you wouldn't be feeling that. There would be no grief. There would be no loss of energy and fatigue. So instead of giving a diagnosis of major depression, it's considering looking at persistent complex bereavement. And again, it's a lot of people who've experiencing chronic illness that looks like depression, but it's really grief, and are often receiving the misdiagnosis. And so now Hannah and I are going to provide you with some actual activities. And so it's going to be coping skills and techniques. And so she's going to go over activity related to anxiety. I'm going to talk about one regarding grief and loss, and then depression. So this is interactive, so I hope you're okay. I'm going to use the chat, and we're going to ask you to type your responses, very brief, nothing too hard, too long, in the chat, and then kind of share how if this was helpful to you. Okay, any questions so far?
I'm checking the chat box here. Let me check the Q&A. No questions so far, but I will keep checking.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, so here is a mindfulness activity that I'd like to share with you all. For this, I would like everyone to take a moment wherever you are and close your eyes. Think about something in your life that is causing you anxiety. And remember that anxiety is fear about something in the future. It has not happened yet. What does thinking of this future event or situation do to your body's physical state? Are you tense? Notice your heart rate. What kinds of emotions or thoughts does this future event or situation bring up for you? Hopelessness, frustration, anger. Take a moment to label these emotions, identify them, name them. You're creating space for yourself to feel this way. You're experiencing these emotions for a reason, so let them be right where they are. Now take a deep breath in, and as you breathe out, let go of any negative thoughts you ascribe to your emotions. Let go of any shame you have around feeling these emotions. Take another deep breath in and name one thing that you're grateful for right in this moment. And as you breathe in, take note of how your body and mind feel. Now breathe out. Focus in on staying right here in this moment You are here, you are breathing, and you are right where you need to be. What do you feel now? Do you notice any joy, any comfort? And if you do, savor that. If you do not feel joy or comfort, that's okay too. Feel any emotion that you're experiencing. Your emotions are what your body is saying to you, so embrace whatever that may be. Doing so is healthy for your mind and your body. Now go ahead and open your eyes and take note of how you feel. Take inventory. What emotions, and you can write these answers in the chat box now that your eyes are open. What emotions did you label, both physically and emotionally, that were your body's response to anxiety? Allison, you can let us know if there's anything.
Thank you for those who are sharing.
Yes. We do have one person. Jessica said she appreciates this service. And I will continue to watch for answers.
Okay. I'll move on.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like there's an answer.
We have someone that says, I was tense, but after the exercise, I felt calm. Thank you, Charlotte.
And you can do this on your own time as well. Okay, well, I'll move to the next question. Using mindfulness in a moment of the meditation that we just exercised, were you able to make space for and welcome in those emotions and allow them to have presence and name them?
So we have another response from the first question. She says, faster breathing and extreme sadness. And then we have a question as well. Can these skills be emailed to us later?
So this PowerPoint is videotaped, and you all will have access, so you could see all of this and then we actually put it in one piece of paper. And I shouldn't say one piece of paper, but on its own slide. So it looks like a kind of an activity. So I hope that's helpful.
And then we have another answer. We have deep breathing always helps calm me. However, sometimes I feel completely numb, no emotions at all.
And so that's normal as well. Being numb, not able to identify emotions. And as Hannah talked about, being mindful and being present. So helping, I would recommend meeting with us individually for those who are numb, so we can help you learn how to begin to recognize emotions. And for you to use the word numb, it's getting deep, getting to the core of where that numbness is, because some people, it's more challenging when someone is not able to even say that they're numb. So to be able to say you're numb is basically like telling us what an emotion is. It's just helping you to put a name to it. So that's actually okay as well. Powerful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. We have another comment on numbness. And then I'm going to get to Mary, your response as well. But Jessica says, that numbness is often my state of heart. Had not thought of that. She also says it's helpful to stop activities of the day and look inside.
And as Hannah's saying, being present. If you're able to be present and sit with it, then you can be able to identify what it is, and put a name to the emotion and label it. And sometimes it's helpful to talk about what she said physically as well as emotionally. So some said tense, some said other things. And it may be physically how you're feeling to be able to name the emotion. It may not necessarily be sadness or good, bad. It could be tension. Someone has told me just always feeling amped up. And so they're basically telling me how their body is feeling. So that's all helpful as well.
Mary has a comment. She says, I'm angry about COVID taking 2 years of my life, along with my diagnosis. I could hear my heartbeat when I relaxed. Breathing does help.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Those are all great responses, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for participating. So, well, good. I'm glad it helped some of you, and I'm glad that some of you want to continue to practice this. And I think we mentioned that naming your emotions, and it's important because it can be helpful with anxiety. Naming things makes them feel more familiar, and we tend to be less fearful of things that we're able to identify and name. And that's important as we work through being present, naming them and understanding what exactly it is that is sitting with us in that moment, because they don't go away. Emotions don't just go away. We have to experience them. We have to sit with them in the present, exactly where they are, and before they could pass. So when you find yourself experiencing anxiety, we hope that you practice mindfulness and some of the other exercises that Dr. Kennett's going to walk us through.
And so as we talk about one who just talked about COVID for the past 2 years, that's added stress. So let's just think about life. Prior to even hearing the diagnosis and hearing this information, there was a thing called life that we have and that you all had, that you've experienced day-to-day stressors. Then you have the diagnosis. Now you are beginning to experience chronic stress because it's with you, a part of your life every day. And now we have COVID. And so grief equals having chronic stressors with you every single day. And so how do we help to eliminate some of that stress or minimize some of that stress and cope with the day-to-day stressors, of chronic stressors? And so one thing is moving, any type of physical movement or exercise. And I know for some it may be impossible or you're not able to at this time due to your current treatment. But if there's any type of exercise, physical movement that you can do, that helps with decreasing stress. A 20-second hug where both you and the person are in each other's own center of gravity. So being able and having the touch of someone else helps as well. As Hannah talked about, breathing, deep breathing and slow breaths. Breathe in and slowly exhale. Oftentimes we don't realize we're not breathing. It's just, we're just going and just going, and it's like, stop. And sometimes we've actually said that in session. Okay, let's just stop. And sometimes when we do that, I'll skip to 5, you'll laugh. Like, oh my God, I couldn't believe I wasn't breathing. And so laughing, a really belly laugh, is also helpful to help you stop and get present to what's happening. Positive social interactions, casual but friendly. So again, with COVID, it's a little challenging. Some, it may be a little more comfortable with getting out and interacting socially, but we do have the Zoom world. For those who feel comfortable, and that's sufficient for them. But if you feel comfortable getting out, with some sort of positive social interactions. And then when you're not feeling your best, that's an emotion too, just letting it all out. And if that means to cry, get it out. Physiologically, your body needs to get it out and let it out. And so you don't want to hold that in. So we can laugh, and then we can also cry. And then doing something creative. Huh?
I was going to say, on that note of crying, we did have another comment.
Okay.
Jessica says, this is an opportunity to cry it out. Even though I know this will pass, I'm a long-term survivor, but have a mammogram coming up soon.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And being present is the key. If you haven't heard, as you thinking about what we're saying, just want to reiterate and summarize. One of our themes is to be present. If you're present and focusing on what's happening right now, it's difficult to mourn what has happened in the past because we can't change it, or it's challenging to be anxious and worried about what can happen in the future. So being present in the moment will help you to focus on these things. You have to be present to do physical activity. You have to be present to do a hug. You have to be present to breathe. You have to be present to interact positively with others, because if not, then the people with you will say, are you here with us? Are you okay? That's their sense that your mind is somewhere else. You have to be present to laugh. You have to hear what's happening. Crying, all of that requires you to be present. And then, oh, I'm so sorry. There, I'm just on a roll. I'm sorry. There we go. Being creative. Expression, creative expression, any kind of drawing, writing, journaling, cooking, gardening, anything that will allow you to, again, be present. You have to be present when you're cooking, writing down your thoughts, working in the yard, doing things. These are all activities that requires you to stay here and now in the moment. And so here's a little activity related, related grief and loss exercise. And so I want you to think about things that make you happy. Oftentimes, we're always worried about making other people happy. We're always worried about making sure other people are okay. We always want to make sure they're okay with what we're experiencing, or we don't want to do anything because they're not going to be okay. So what I like for you to do is just take a few seconds and write down. If you can do 5, that's fine. If not, but just write down a few things that makes you happy. And then how often are you actually doing it? So how often do I do this, and how often would I want to do it? And if you look at the bottom, there's a key. You can put a W for weekly, D for daily, M for monthly, S for seldom, and N for never. So if you could take a second to do that. And if there's anyone who'd like to share one of theirs, things that makes them happy, and how often they do it, and how often they would want to. Okay.
We have a response. We've got, I like to write. I want to do it weekly. It's now 2 times a month.
Okay, so getting it up to 2 more times. All right, anyone else? Thank you for sharing. I know for myself, things that what makes me happy is being able to exercise, and I like to do it daily, and it used to be never. And so now I'm moving it up to at least it's weekly. I'm trying to get as many days in as possible. But I'm doing better. I'm trying to practice what I preach as far as self-care and things that make me happy. And I definitely can tell when I take care of myself, how I am when I'm in relationship with others. When I'm happy and healthy, I engage in happy and healthy interactions with others.
Wow. Yes, I can agree on that one. For myself. We have a few more responses. Let's see. We have, I'm working on getting back to the habit of walking daily. So back to exercise there. Another walking, Sandra says, I like to walk and try to every day for about an hour. Nature makes me feel good. And Charlotte is encouraging you, Naynette. She says, you can do it.
Thank you. I'm trying.
And we have Mary here. She likes to journal, meets with her book club, and spiritual growth.
Good, good. Okay, journal. Book club, that's another thing I like to do. Okay, and so when you're thinking about depression and coping, again, a lot of the things that I talked about with for grief and loss, things that make you happy, the things that Hannah talked about with anxiety with mindfulness, they all can also work with helping you cope with depression. But research show definitely cognitive behavioral therapy, either individually or in group therapy, as well as support group led by a professional. As we stated, mindfulness activities, anything that will allow you to relax, yoga, excuse me, and then learning new coping skills. Self-affirmations, being able to affirm yourself is critical in engaging in happy, healthy day-to-day living. Because if you don't affirm yourself or you don't pour into yourself, who will? And so when you think about self-affirmations, they're about present tense. What are you doing now? Not what you've done in the past or what you want to do, but what you're doing right now. So I can cope even though I worry that I can't. My feelings of, and you fill in the blank, it could be sadness, are understandable. And it's unlikely that I will be sad forever. And I deserve to be happy. Again, all present, speaking to yourself, affirming yourself, empowering yourself, which also goes to the positive talk. I will be okay. I will get through this. I will be strong. And then doing the stress cycle, which we just talked about, engaging in at least, I know it's 7 of them, try to do at least 2 to 3 a day. You will definitely see a difference in your mood, in your feelings, in your emotions, how you see yourself, see the world, your future, if you pour into you. Because that is the goal to change your mood, to be able to identify pleasurable sensations, a part of your everyday. Oh, I keep going too fast, I'm sorry. And so one more, this is the last one, pleasurable sensations. Today, I know earlier I had you all do the mood thermometer. And so I want you to think about, again, maybe starting your day or ending your day with filling in the blanks. Today was, or today is going to be a better day than yesterday, or beautiful, or fun. And then think about how you feel. Identify some of the ways that you are feeling. What do you see? Is there anything particular enjoyment that you think is beautiful? I know someone talked about gardening or being out in nature, and think about those things. And what do you hear? Maybe listening to some music, different sounds, hearing your children, grandchildren, people play. Just being present is the goal, is to thinking about what's happening right now. Taste, what are some of the foods, maybe thinking about or having a favorite food or favorite drink to have, and enjoying that. And touch, maybe getting a nice blanket or getting a massage. TurningPoint offers massages, or putting on a nice body cream. But again, being present, getting in touch with all of the senses, and being able to be present and right now. This will help those who are numb to be able to start to name and identify some of the emotions that you're experiencing. And then think about, what do you need, or what would help you right now to feel whatever that feeling is that you want to have for that day. Okay? Any questions about this? This is a good, for the one who said they like to journal, this is a good daily journal to have. To, have gratitude daily and pour into yourself and be present, affirm, self-talk, all of the things that you have to do within yourself. Although when you think about grief and you think about depression, social support is very important, and it's one of the protective factors. But when you think about other anxieties, it's also intrinsic motivation. And so internally within yourself, how do you motivate yourself? How do you help you get through the day? Because there are going to be times when others may or may not be available, or what they say is not that helpful. And so you want to be able to pour into yourself and give yourself what you need to be okay right now. And so here's the actual activity. I know someone asked if we can email. So this is the activity that's a part of this. We just wrote it out. And then finally, I want to end with your future self. I know you're probably thinking, now you just said anxiety is future. This is on a good note. And so, of course, we all have to plan. It's called life. But when you think about yourself, and if you've experienced some anxiety or some grief and loss or some low self-esteem or body image or sadness or overwhelm, any of those feelings, I want you to think about moving forward for 2022. Your job only is to just get through it. As Hannah said, sit with it, begin to name it, identify it. It'll help you to muscle through. And that's it. You don't have to conquer your grief or create anything beautiful out of it or bounce or any of that nonsense. You just need to endure it. Sit with it, endure it, and it'll help you feel better about yourself as well as your future. And then finally, connect to what is meaningful. Focus on your values, your beliefs, the way you wish to live, or what or who makes a difference to you. If you notice, I ended with you. You are important, your thoughts, your feelings, your mood, and when you are happy and healthy, you show up happy and healthy in all that you do in your everyday. Thank you for all. We enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, now is the time.
Okay, so we have Jessica again, and she said, this provides structure I need to stay focused and consistent. Thank you for this time together today. We have another thank you from Charlotte. Thank you guys for being here and your participation.
Thank you. Yes.
Patricia says, thank you. We have another in the Q&A. Mary says, it is a good day. I feel a little annoyed with the realtor. Retailer. Oh, sorry. I hope for a healthy future for my family. Okay.
Well, is there something new? Does anyone want to share something new that they want to share? Or maybe if we go back to that, let's go back to that mood and see where are you now? Mood check. How are you feeling now? Drum roll.
We have another comment. She says, I started to skip the presentation, but she is glad she did not.
Good, thank you.
We have 2 2s on the scale.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay!
Mary says, great class. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
We have a 4 on the scale.
Yay! Oh gosh, I'm so excited. We below 5. But guess what? If you are above a 5, it is still okay. I think that's a challenge too. It is okay to not be okay. Remember, on the stress cycle, one of them is to let it out. If that means to cry, to laugh, to hug, to move, whatever you need to do. But it's still okay if you are above a 5.
Yeah. Awesome. Looking good. Jessica says she's feeling much better.
Good. All right. And let me do this last PowerPoint. Oh. Clapping.
That's awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody again for being here today. Thank you, Hannah and Naynette, for your lovely presentation. Again, this has been recorded. So for those of you who asked if you could do the activities later, you certainly can. It will be posted on YouTube, Facebook, all of those places there. And if you do have a question that you did not get answered, oh, and Charlotte's going for a walk. All right.
I'm jealous.
Yeah. You can email us at staff@myturningpoint.org. And again, our services with Naynette are always available to you. And
Yes.
we're thankful to have you. And I look forward to you said in 2022, Naynette, you're going to be doing a grief
and loss. Yes, we're going to do one on grief and loss to go more in depth to understanding what that looks like.
Yeah, so be on the lookout for that one.
All
Well,
right.
everyone has wonderful holidays coming up, and have a safe rest of your day and a good day.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Naynette and Hannah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.